Level up your LA Kings experience with the new Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access. Enjoy great seats to the game along with premier dining inside the Lexus Club with all-you-can-eat food and non-alcoholic beverages. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings item and parking with your purchase. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn rewards on each purchase from the only ticket company that rewards you for buying. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings.
You're listening to an LA Kings podcast. For more episodes of this and every other Kings program, visit lakings.com/podcast.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
All right, we are checking in from training camp. We are recording on Sunday. I don't even know the day of the month, Zach. Is it the 22nd?
The days in training camp blend together so much that it's like, you don't even realize, like, man, I just worked my entire Sunday.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like a day. It's just another day, you know?
We're recording. This is day 4 of camp. We've spoken to Jim Hiller. We've watched Group A. We're recording this Sunday afternoon, and we're going to check in with the top 10 questions because a lot of the answers have become fairly clear. So question number 1 was which goalies will be assigned to which teams. I've seen nothing to suggest that it was anything other than what we guessed. Obviously, I knock on wood. If there's an injury that might change, we are hoping for no injuries in that regard.
I think the biggest update, which is a great one, is that we've seen Phoenix Copley participate in full, seemingly no restrictions. That's awesome. You know, coming off the injury that he did, it's awesome to see him out there playing again, contributing in full.
And he's in the scrimmages. He's not like just practicing.
He's played, as much as every other goalie. It's been really great.
Question 2, what will the forward lines be to start the season? They look exactly like what you reported months ago. Laferriere, Kopitar, Kempe, Byfield, Fogle, Fiala, Tanner, Jeannot, Deneau, Jeannot, and more.
Deneau, Jeannot.
Yeah, and Lewis, Turcotte, Thomas, and Fagemo as the 13th forward, at least today, I guess.
So I think we knew day one, right?
Yeah.
No surprises for either of us day one. The question was how long? And I think the question was kind of answered is like Jim Hiller wants to see these lines play exhibition games together and give them at least probably a couple weeks to gel or not gel. And if they don't gel, then you can look to switch them up. But I do think we'll see that consistency at least probably going into Quebec.
Yeah.
And
well, I'm gonna blend questions 2, 4, and 7 because it's
maybe even 10.
What will the forward lines be? What will the defensive pairs and how many defensemen on the roster for game 1? It looks like a 23-man roster.
Yep.
It looks like 8 defensemen, which again you and I both expected, and I tried to say repeatedly. And it looks like Fagemo, at least to start, will be the 13th forward. Now I'm speaking with confidence on that because today, day 4, Group A was that group, the forward lines that I just laid out, and the 8 defensemen being Anderson, Doughty, Gavrikov, Spence, Edmondson, Clark, Burrows, and Englund.
Yep.
And those are the pairs that we've seen in the scrimmages. And today, again, there's 3 groups in all 4 days of practice, but until today, the Group A from today had been split up amongst Group A and B. Group A today appears to be the roster that you and I would have anticipated to start the season.
That's the roster as of today, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of days left. There are performance-driven reasons that a guy or two could bump in or out. There are injury possibilities. Obviously, an injury has already impacted camp. The unfortunate, situation with Arthur Kaliev being out for a while. He was the guy who could have disrupted that group for sure, and was set to,
Yeah, so let's get into question 10, which was how
I think
Arthur
that fits
Kaliev,
in here, right?
Impact the roster. As you said on Twitter, and we heard broken clavicle out indefinitely were the words that Jim Hiller used.
It sucks.
It does.
It sucks. It really felt like he was going to get the fresh start we talked about,
It's
right?
bad. It's horrible timing.
It's awful for a guy who I think seemed to come in with a really good approach.
Mm-hmm.
We heard from Jim Hiller, like, bygones are bygones in this situation both ways. Mm-hmm. It's important for it to be both ways too. It's not just on the player. It's got to be on the team as well. It sucks, man. It's awful to see that happened to him.
He was the wrinkle in the roster that you and I would have anticipated. Like in June, I think you and I, if somebody asked us to write down a 23-man roster, we would have done it with the understanding that at the time, Kaliev didn't have a contract, so wouldn't be included. Once he signed that contract, once he showed up into camp, suddenly the 23-man roster became a little less clear. Would Kaliev's inclusion mean that Fagemo was assigned to Ontario? Would it mean that they'd carry 7 defensemen and 14 forwards? Who knows? That's what camp's for. But now, unfortunately, it's rendered moot because he's not available. And so it reverts back to that 23-man roster that we've been anticipating for the last few months.
I think there became a time in the summer, and it wasn't July 1st, when you and I both said, okay, 8 defensemen feels likely.
Yeah.
And at that point, that's when the puzzle became more complex, because if you thought 7D, then okay, there you can see how the situation plays out. When you assume 8D, which we've always been on the same page there, it changes things. So the injury, like we all know that camps are rarely perfect.
Yeah.
We had a picture of last year's roster as well. And then Kaliev got suspended. Arvidsson had his own out indefinitely situation, and the picture changed. The picture has changed already, and we're 4 days in. So we know what it kind of looks like right now. And there are guys behind that 23 who I think have had nice showings over these first 4 days who are going to be ready to step in if situation dictates. So that's important too, as we don't know what could happen over these next few weeks. The Kings will need more than 23 guys this year to get through a season. So it's important to still look out for how some other guys do in these early exhibition games to get on the fringes of that mix.
We're going to go totally out of order on these questions because I want to tackle number 6 next, which is who will be the last cuts / surprise standouts. I don't know how long he'll be in camp, but the one player that I have noticed, the one player that Jim Hiller has mentioned, the one player that pretty much everybody who's come and watched these practices and scrimmages has noticed is Sammy Helenius. We were waiting for Jim Hiller to come talk to us today. Groups B and C were scrimmaging together, so PR let us know, like, hey, Jim Hiller will come talk during the intermission, so just go ahead and quit standing around waiting for him. You can go watch the end of the scrimmage. So I walked out just to catch the last 3 minutes of the Group B and C scrimmage, and as soon as I stepped out of the locker room hallway, Sammy Helenius just drilled Cole Davis into the corner about as hard as I've ever seen anybody do it. And I mean, that's 4 days in a row now that he's just punishing people.
He's standing out for sure. And Jim Hiller's brought him up 2 of his first 3 media avails of training camp, kind of unprompted.
Yeah.
Which has been interesting. Big man. And I've heard from endless players that this is the most physical and intense camp they've been to with the Kings. And that is Samuel Helenius' game, right?
Yeah.
You talk about size in the bottom 6. You talk about a guy who needs to play to that size to get to the NHL. He's doing that. And, you know, I think he has worked himself higher in the mix on these first 4 days than he was on day one.
No question. I mean, going into this camp, you could say Helenius, Lee, Ward, you know, there were a couple guys on Ontario that are earmarked someday for, you know, an NHL career, or at least that's the hope, right? I mean, Helenius was a 2nd round pick. But day 3, Helenius gets in a fight with Jeff Malott. I think the phrase that Hiller used was he's here to fight for a spot, you know,
something along those lines. Yeah.
And, you know, I briefly chatted with Helenius and he said the same thing. He said, like, you know, I want to make the team. I want to play in the NHL and do what I have to do to get there. And that feels like the mood all 4 days in camp is like, yes, the guys that are not on that 23-man Group A roster this morning understand where they slot into the depth chart, but I don't feel like any of them are accepting it. I don't feel like anybody's happy to be here.
Same goes for Malott, right? Like,
yeah.
Guy who's willing to do that.
Right.
I think those are 2 guys who might be a little higher on the depth chart than maybe they were going into day one, and that's pretty cool. I like it. I like the approach to camp. The fight was it was funny. Like, it took me aback a lot, as I'm sure it did for you. And then it didn't seem to take anyone internally aback. It was kind of like, no, like, it's a matter of time. Why didn't this happen earlier?
So there have been fights at other teams' training camps over the years.
Yeah.
Like, not a ton, but, you know, once every couple of years, you'll
see it on Twitter, right?
Yeah, it'll be like, oh, 2 guys threw down, whatever. Obviously, we're not embedded with those teams. We don't know the personalities. But the impression I always got as an outsider from those fights was, oh, maybe one of them is a unsavory character, or there's something personal going on. Hellenius and Malat didn't seem personal on any level. No. It was just Hellenius was driving to the net. He was getting pushed around. He got tired of it. He and Malat were barking at each other. And it was a fight right off the face-off in a scrimmage.
Yeah.
And it didn't seem to be like any hard feelings. It didn't seem
like Jimmy said, they probably gained some respect for each other for doing it on both sides.
But
right?
It wasn't awkward. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was just, and there had been other stuff in day 2 and day 1. Turcotte gave Lee a good shot to the midsection in one of the scrimmages. Ward got pushed around a little bit.
Janot Fogel even got into it a little bit on day 1.
But nobody, like I said, it didn't seem to be personal. It was just everybody's here to fight for a spot, which you like, I like, Jim Hiller seems to like. It's great.
I don't think this team has had enough of that mentality in recent years. And I feel like the guys who are here have said that.
Yeah.
They aren't shying away from thinking everything has been perfect. Like, that mentality hasn't been there.
I don't know if I would say that the reason the Kings have struggled in the playoffs against the Oilers is exclusively because of that element, but it is certainly a factor that when some of your best players are pushed around or hit and there isn't a significant pushback, I feel like that needed to be addressed, and it certainly was. Whether or not it was addressed just the right amount, too much and not enough, that's why they play the games, we'll see. Yeah. But it's they went into this offseason with a plan, and they have executed it.
It's interesting because we heard about it so much. We knew the players who were brought in. I still didn't expect to see a camp that was so many levels higher in those areas. Mm-hmm. And that's probably on me for not thinking like, hey,
I mean, how could you know?
You don't know, right? But like, it's been more than expected. And Drew Doughty's quote stands out to me. He said, "We've been pushed around too often. We will not be pushed around this year." And
certainly doesn't.
I have a hard time thinking that they will, having watched these first few days.
I mean, the buzzword of the offseason was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And every player that we've talked to over the 4 days they haven't maybe used the word uncomfortable, but they've said they're tired, they're exhausted, it's been physical, it's been intense, like a bunch of other words that go into the stew that gets you uncomfortable.
I think that word, it was talked about so much, it was regularly mocked, right? For the word being used, because we didn't know exactly what it meant. I feel like we now know what it meant. And talking to these guys, and you ask, like, is this a little more tiring? And you almost get laughs of like, yeah, this is a lot more tiring. And it's funny is the Kings haven't done goal line sprints one time.
You're right.
Not one time have they done these sprints, and they're way more tired than they were in past years. And that's working drills with more pace, more intensity, less rest throughout the hour instead of breaking it up at the end. And if that's been the goal, which I feel like it has certainly been felt by the players.
So we're going to knock out some of the easier questions to dismiss at this point in camp. Number 8 was, will the Kings lose any players to waivers? There haven't been any cuts yet, so it hasn't had an opportunity. I'm falling into your camp this year. I just can't imagine anybody getting claimed off of waivers. No disrespect to the guys that ultimately will be assigned to Ontario, but I just every team has their own camps and their own invitees and their own prospects. And as impressive as I think Hellenius has been, to claim him off of the waivers means
I don't even know if he's eligible to be claimed.
You might be right. Yeah. I didn't even think about that. But I mean, like, I just don't anticipate it.
Look, and if they do, it's not going to be the guy that you think it is.
Right.
Or not you, but everyone.
But,
it's not going to be the player people think it is. It's going to be someone like Christian Wolanin. When Christian Wolanin, no one was saying, you can't waive Wolanin.
Right.
He was the guy who got claimed by Buffalo because Buffalo had a specific need for that player. It'll be someone like that, in my opinion.
Next question that's easy to dismiss, I think, is, will any invitees earn contracts? Part of this is because of the way camp is structured. Part of this is just because we know the 23-man roster. Most of the invitees have been in Group C.
Yeah.
Days 1 through 3, and then today they've been sort of split up between Groups B and C. Most of our time has been focused on the early morning skates with groups A and B, who would then scrimmage against each other. And then when Group C was out on the ice, we were talking to Jim Hiller and doing media availability. So I haven't had a chance to watch any of the camp invitees, or many of them anyway. And I don't think Jim Hiller had much of a chance to watch. Todd McClellan used to complain about too many guys and too many sheets of ice and hard to watch everybody. And I spoke to somebody in the front office about the benefits of Group C. Is it helpful to get guys like Cohen Zemer and Jacob Dvorak and Liam Greentree? We know that they're probably not contending for a spot on the roster, but is it useful for them to just go through the process, come to camp, meet the coaches, do the drill, like to understand that in a year or two, maybe 3, this is what you will have to do? Or is it more beneficial to the coaching staff, the scouts, the front office to watch all of the prospects and the invitees? Because there's a bunch of invitees. I said, who does it benefit more? And the answer was both. It's beneficial to both sides of the equation. But the real answer, as far as you and I are concerned, is I don't know really how well those guys have looked, other than the limited exposure that we saw in the scrimmages days 1 through 3.
I think we might have a better idea on Thursday if are there select guys from that group who get the chance to play in a preseason game against Utah or against Vegas. My guess would be if there is someone who has stood out, maybe a handful of guys, they would get those looks in the preseason over others. I also think we'll start to see the roster trim down over the next 3 days. I think by Thursday, when the team comes back to like formal practices, we'll probably be down to like 2 larger groups, or 2 groups plus like a group waiting for rain camp to open. So I think we will get an answer to those questions over the next couple of days. The one name that is standing out is different than what you're saying, but it's Jared Woolley. Yeah. He's been in the main group, I think 3 days when they did double sessions. I don't think he was ever placed in Group C. Yeah. He's 18, extremely raw. He's a longer term project, but they like something about what he's doing. And Marco Sturm, I thought, spoke very highly of him. He said like, hey, there's something there with this guy. He played 4 months of major junior hockey. He was playing junior B in this time last year. I think the Kings do like him, his longer term fit. I think they want to work with him a lot, and doesn't mean they're going to sign him to an ELC tomorrow. Right. But I bet he gets an exhibition game. He doesn't have a contract, and it seems like he's in good graces with a lot of people in the organization.
So 2 things on Willie. One, he's huge. And
I interviewed that guy during rookie camp, and he had his skates on, and I was like, I was like all the way back looking up at this guy. I was like, you are 15 years younger than me, man. And
part of this camp that has really blown me away, and maybe it's just because Lizotte and Arvidsson are gone, and those were 2 of the shorter players. And
these dudes are big.
But the camp is like, it feels like everybody on the ice is gigantic, and yet then I go into the locker room and I see a bunch of them, and they're not, it's like
they're the regular size.
Fiala and Spence are not.
I think they're not practice huge, jerseys are making guys look bigger.
Oh, that could be.
However, there is clearly more size, even if they're making them look a little bigger. Like there is more size.
And the other thing about Willie is I just was sort of chit chatting with him yesterday after the Malott-Hellenius fight, and I just asked him, like, have you ever been to a training camp where there was a fight? And he laughed and he said, yeah, that's some junior B stuff right there. So that's anyway, apparently much more common in the lower levels. But yeah, he's obviously a draft pick. If he, who knows if he'll get an ELC or not. But as far as the cuts coming, not tomorrow or today when you're listening to this, but Monday next is the start of Ontario training camp.
Yep.
And the last of the Southern California, or last of the preseason games in the United States. After that, they travel to Quebec.
Yep.
And you and I have already stated, we expect the major cuts to happen
probably that Sunday.
Yeah. In advance of because the Monday game is in Anaheim. It's on, and then off to Quebec. Yep. They'll probably take the main roster with 5, maybe 5 extra guys.
You'd think no more than like 30,
right? Probably
even a little bit less. So like by that point, you're looking at the majority of the moves having been made, right?
So to your point about this week, the extra, the additional cuts, because there's 3 groups. Group A is what we expect the NHL roster to be. Group B and Group C today are a blend of the Reign roster and OHL or CHL designated players and invitees. So at some point between now and next Monday, they'll whittle down.
Yeah.
So anyway, the next question on the list that I wanted to go over that's easy to dismiss is who will be on the power play. We don't know because they haven't worked on the power play yet.
We don't.
So I could take some educated guesses, but we don't know.
Sure. But I imagine that you have some intel on
the PK, which
PK,
I'm sort of saving for last.
Question, right?
Yeah. But as far as the power play, like, wow,
I think we have good ideas.
Like I said, you could take
maybe one note is Jim Hiller said that they are open to the possibility of 2 defensemen on a unit.
I missed that. Okay.
It might have been the media that you weren't at when you were doing
on
some
day one,
technical testing, but he was asked that and did say that it's an option being considered, especially when you look at the personnel. There are 3 guys who could be on the power play.
So the final question that we will tackle is question number 5, who will play on the penalty kill? Today, again, day 4, Sunday, the Group A, which is 23 players we expect to be on the NHL roster, they practice drills on one rink. Then with about, I don't know, half an hour left till the end of practice, they moved to the other rink so that they could Zamboni the main rink because that's where groups B and C were scrimmaging. On the other rink, they split into penalty kill and non-penalty kill groups. It wasn't penalty kill and power play. It was guys on the penalty kill. And what I observed was, and Jim Hiller confirmed when we spoke to him afterwards, 4 forward pairs and 7 defensemen rotated through on the penalty kill. And the pairs were Kopitar. They were totally predictable. Kopitar and Kempe, Moore and Deneau, Lewis and Thomas. Maybe actually that one was, I wouldn't have known that Thomas was and Turcotte wasn't, but
I do know that they liked to keel on the penalty kill last year.
And as John Hoven is fond of pointing out, he actually did play some shifts as a defenseman in juniors.
It did happen every so often. But I know that they like a keel on the PK.
The surprising pair to me on the penalty kill was Byfield and Foegele. Yeah. Byfield's a player that has not historically killed penalties. And a lot of people who were anxious for him to become the player that everybody wants him to be, that was one of the things that people were clamoring for. Play him on the penalty kill, play him in overtime. Well, he and Foegele appear to be a forward pair. Now, Jim Hiller clarified, you can't always control who's in the box.
Sure.
So
and in the lineup, right?
Right. Injuries and whatnot. But let's say there's a game, it certainly happened before. Let's say 3 guys wind up in the penalty box. Let's say Moore and Deneau are both in the penalty box. Well, they're not a pair, so
right.
or they're not available. So Jim Hiller said, they generally speaking run, what did he say? 3 forward pairs, 2 D pairs.
Yep.
But they wanted to get everybody that they thought of as legitimate NHL penalty killers an opportunity to run through the system. He said it was a little bit more aggressive. So those are the forward pairs. All defensemen except for Jordan Spence participated in the penalty kill, which I thought was interesting because Brant Clark did. Mm-hmm. Jordan Spence didn't. So I don't know if that
is interesting.
That, it's just a weird wrinkle. I don't know if it has anything to do with who plays on the power play. So they had those 15 guys on the penalty kill. Going up against them were Turcotte, Laferriere, Fiala, Jeannot, Spence, and Fagemo. And then a blend of Hudon, Studnicka, those guys, Godin. So the power play was just a combo of Group A and Group B players that were out there to give the penalty killer someone to penalty kill against. I got to confess, I wouldn't have noticed that it was more aggressive had Jim Hiller not said it, but he did. So
I want to see Byfield Foegele used a lot in the preseason because I know that Kopitar Kempe can do it.
Yeah.
I know that Moore Deneau can do it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about Byfield Foegele because Q hasn't really killed penalties here, and Foegele is 4 days into his Kings career. That's the group I want to see in the preseason, right? I have no issue that Deneau Moore on opening night will do the job. Same with Kopitar and Kempe. We know what they are. I want to see what Byfield and Foegele can do because they're interesting. They both skate so well. Byfield's length is unbelievable. That should be the group that could, you put him out with 20 seconds left and they can use their skating the other way. Like Quinton should be a great penalty killer with his abilities.
The one thing I did notice watching those drills is that there was an unexpectedly high number of stretch passes to a penalty killer leaving the zone.
Yeah.
Who blew past the power play point men and was
about time they got away from the 1-3-1 on the penalty kill.
I mean,
it was stifling their offensive abilities.
It was. I mean, it was not like a ton, but it was at least 4 or 5, and Byfield had 2 of them and was just off on his horse.
Yeah.
We talked to Jim Hiller about the regular season last year. Obviously, the penalty kill was a strength.
Yep.
The postseason, I don't want to say it was a weakness because it was Edmonton. It's not like Edmonton didn't murder everybody on the penalty kill. So
I think it was a weakness.
It certainly was in the numbers. I just mean it's hard for me to single the Kings out.
True.
It was a historically dominant power play.
I mean, there was an article put out on The Athletic between games 4 and 5 of like a bunch of very strong hockey minds saying like, I mean, what do you do? Right. Like Patrice Bergeron was quoted and like Ken Hitch, like all these really were like, well, you can't stop it.
No. So, and I mean, like, I don't know if people know this or remember this, but when Edmonton was a powerhouse, unlike anybody could conceive of.
Talking like the Gretzky.
Yeah. They changed the rules to stop Edmonton from scoring so much. It wasn't necessarily the power play, but like they got rid of 4-on-4, but the whole matching penalties and everything because Edmonton was so dangerous 4-on-4.
Let's change the rules again. I'm sick of this.
I mean, it seems silly to me to change the rules to accommodate for one team, but Edmonton's power play is...
Well, if they're not going to change the playoff format, I'll welcome it. If it helps the Kings slow down that PP, I'll accept any rule change.
But yeah, to your point, Byfield, if he is going to be the player that everybody anticipates that he's being, then that should be that should be part of his arsenal.
I'd love to see it like in the preseason for sure. Like, it on paper, it makes sense for sure. It makes sense on paper. And if that helps to spell some of the harder minutes and spread the minutes around, I'm all about it.
So those are the 10 questions. Those are the updates. The first preseason game is today, Monday. We're recording this on Sunday, but you'll be hearing it on Monday.
Huh? Yeah.
We don't know at the time of recording who will be in the game group going to Utah, but we do know the rules, which is that you have to have 8 players, not necessarily veterans, because first-round picks from this season count towards the 8-player limit, but you have to have 8 players that people would theoretically want to see. Liam Greentree counts as that. He's the only first-round pick we have from this past draft. And then after that, they will have to get 7 guys with the appropriate experience into the lineup, and I have no idea who those 7 guys will be.
Yeah. It's most of the group that played last year would be eligible. Yeah. And you can add in like a Caleb Jones would be eligible, Jack Studnicka. We're not sure about Phoenix Copley, but we're pretty sure that he would count. Riddick would count, Kemper. So there's a bigger pool than you might think, but it's not, it does have an end too. So I don't think we're going to see Kopitar or Doughty in this game, but we will see for sure guys who we expect to be with the NHL club because you have to dress some of them.
And because it's Utah, Trevor Lewis becomes an option.
You'd think, right?
Yeah,
maybe. Wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. If it was Arizona,
right?
I wouldn't have thought.
No.
But it's Utah. So
I also think it might be a decent test because a lot of team, it's Utah's first game on home ice. It's a game with no travel. You wouldn't be shocked to see them maybe dress a more veteran heavy lineup than the Kings. Similar to what the Kings do when they play at Crypto, right? The Kings would always
I I wouldn't be shocked if Utah rolls out a
lot of them, right?
Their game 1 roster.
Same. So you see those mismatches on paper sometimes, and it's a great test for a younger group. How can they
I don't remember
hang in there?
Who else was on Vegas's roster last year, but the preseason game where Hayden Hodgson and Brant Clark tussled with Mark Stone.
A lot of those guys played for sure.
Yeah.
That was a mismatch, right?
Yes.
Like on paper,
Correct.
The Kings won that game.
Yeah. And so the Kings have the 2 games in Quebec, which we assume will be NHL veteran laden. They have 2 games in Southern California against the Ducks, both in Anaheim and in Ontario. The Empire Classic tickets still available, I'm sure.
Not many though, from what I've heard.
That's great.
There are some, but I think
if you have a chance, honestly,
get
them because that building. I've never seen that building fully sold out. But I've seen it very close to sold out.
I have seen it sold out,
and it's great.
When I was with the Reign a number of times, and It's really cool.
Yeah.
Those games are so much better than, respectfully, the ones that are at either crypto or in an NHL barn, because a lot of times those are just tickets given out with season tickets. They're not sold out. And even if the crowd is the same, it's half full.
Yeah.
In games like Ontario, they're packed.
And the building's
It's
just
really
more
cool.
intimate. It's
tighter.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be a really cool energy. I'm gonna go to that one.
And it's Kings Ducks,
Yeah.
It's the first real Kings, obviously they played each other the final game of the rookie showcase, or face off.
I think it should be really cool.
Yeah.
Excited to see that building with that crowd.
So those 4 preseason games, there are reasons that I can think of to play some recognizable play. Like, I have no idea who's going to be playing in the Empire Classic for the Kings, but we're asking people to drive out to Ontario to go to this unusual location. I would anticipate that they want at least some guys in the lineup.
Yeah.
It's not going to be Group C of the Kings.
They got to
versus
play at
Group-
some point.
Yeah.
Too, usually
But
you
that's
see-
why I think games 1 and 2 in Utah and Vegas, maybe you're trying to fit that 8 veteran roster
think so,
rule
too.
as closely as you can. Because the veterans are going to have to play. And I mean, was it Darcy Kemper who said he wanted to play in every preseason game until he was asked if that meant all 6? And he said, well, maybe not all 6.
Yeah.
So
I think usually it's like maybe 3 to 4 for your Kopitars and Dowdies. So you'd think that would be 3 or 4 of the final 4.
Yeah.
Like, they have to go to Quebec. It's not back to back. Probably 2 games there.
yeah.
And then you have to imagine at least one of Anaheim or Ontario, if not both, for some of those guys.
So just a fair warning to anybody who might want to be coming out to training camp this week. Monday is a game day in Utah, so it'll be a little bit shorter schedule, more condensed. Tuesday's the day off.
Yep.
So if
Don't
you
come
were,
Tuesday.
Yeah, if you were planning on coming to watch training camp on Tuesday, don't. There's not going to be anybody here. You might get to see Darrell Evans jumping rope on the concourse. You might bump into me or Zach coming in and out of the office, but
That's about it.
yeah, that's and then after that, the schedule will have to be laid out, and we'll see.
Yeah, Wednesday too is game day, obviously. But
Yeah,
there will be
right.
practices. There's a morning skate for the game group, and then a practice for the non-game group. It'll just be less time. The guys will be out there, right?
And I try and always warn people about this. If you hear that practice is 10 to 11, they've been pretty by the clock in training camp. But like once the season starts, if practice is at 10.
Be here
Scheduled to 10 to 11. Yeah,
yeah.
it means 9:45 to 10:15 sometimes.
Yeah.
And people show up at 10:20 and they're like, what happened? It's like, they're done. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I know it can be a chore to get out here for some people. So
Yeah.
plan accordingly. But in theory, camp is open to the public. But Tuesday, there's nothing to see.
Tuesdays.
You can
is
come, but
it'll
you
be.
can get some cookies from Kings Cove, and that's about it.
It might be an adult league
Yeah.
skate
Right.
in the morning. Yeah.
Right. So that's it for all of our questions. That's it for all of the pressing news, I think. 4 days into camp, I mean, I think the biggest takeaway, we've talked about it already, but I mean, for me, the biggest takeaway is just everybody's huge and everybody's hitting everybody.
Everybody's huge and everybody's hitting everybody. That's a good summarization of these 4 days. I like it.
And that's Jim Hiller seems happy.
Yep.
The players seem tired, but in that good way.
Yeah.
And, I think everybody just wants the season to start because we can see all these
Yeah.
things being practiced in camp, this new identity. But it as Jim Hiller said today, it doesn't mean anything until you
Totally.
take it out onto the ice against an opponent.
The guys seem to be saying it not as like a what the heck's going on way, in like a this is what we want way.
Mm-hmm.
That's been my impression, at least, which is really good. Like buy-in is, I feel like, crucial if you're going to try to play a certain way like that. And it's 4 days, but it feels like it's there.
In the offseason, we talked to Ed Egros about some of the newer players, and he jokingly called it the cultural revolution. I laughed and used the phrase a lot because I thought it was funny. 4 days into training camp, I'm now just using it like totally sincerely.
I'm not laughing the way that I was when I
Right.
heard
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
You almost had to see it in person, and there have been differences, and
There
that's
definitely have.
encouraging. And ultimately, like Jim Hiller said this morning, you get judged on whether or not you win the final game of the season. For the Kings, I think they'll be judged even sooner than that. How do they perform when these games count? And I'm really excited to see how these types of concepts and ideas and this mindset translates to real games in October.
Yeah. All the new guys seem to have come as advertised.
Yeah.
Everything promised seems so far as it can be 4 days through training camp has been delivered. So Let's get to game one. Thanks for listening, Kings fans. Sort of a short one today, but we will have more updates as camp goes on. And, follow Dooley and me on Twitter, because if you want to know what's going on in camp, we'll let you know.